We then moved on to the third era of leadership, which was what we call behavioral. This was actually how people actually acted, okay? You could be tall, but you could be selfish. You could have a thick head of hair, but you could be non-sympathetic or non-empathic. So what they realized, again, as leadership evolved, is that, and again, at this point, leadership and management were still pretty much similar, okay? Leaders were considered the best managers. We haven't really seen the divergence of leadership and management. But at the point of the behavioral theory, this became a time when we really cared about what people did. And if the great man theory was mystical and the trait theory was physical and psychological, the behavioral theory was somewhat sociological, okay? As the behavioral sciences continued to expand, okay, we started studying what were the behaviors of the best managers. What did they actually do? And of course, back in the trait theory, a lot of times you had autocratic type behaviors. You had dictators, you had kings, you had people who were the bosses, and then they had their servants, right? The servants of the king. There was the court jester, there was the food taster, there were all these people who were in service to the king. But that was not necessarily the best approach as people became more self-sufficient. If you look at the 20th century, you'll find that people had more access to information, right? Even before the internet, you had the Encyclopedia Britannicas, you had radio news stories, you had television news stories. So as people became less dependent upon their leaders for answers, they demanded that their leaders start treating them well, right? I mean, if you look at human resources, right? In the 1920s and 30s, the boss said, jump, you said, how high, right? And as time went on with unionization and education and information, people started saying, you know what? I want a job where I'm treated like a human being. I want to be respected. I want to be valued. I wanted to be appreciated. And so what you found is that people started following those leaders who were the most supportive, the most nurturing, the most tolerant, people who were patient, because we wanted to be respected and trusted for what we did. So a lot of studies happened in the 20th century, the 1900s, where people tested different types of behaviors. They would, being that management was a relatively new science, the first thing that the behavioral scientists did is they tried to test management behavior the way we tested things in the laboratory, right? The hard sciences preceded the soft sciences. So we wanted to take a lesson from chemistry or physics and say, let's do an experimental test. Let's have people work in low light conditions and see if they work better or worse than high light conditions. Let's have people work in cold buildings and see if they work as well as when they're warm. And what they found out is that didn't necessarily affect the work output as much as the relationships they had to their boss and to each other. And so there was a study done, a famous study done, which talked about the emphasis on accomplishing a task versus the consideration you had for their people. And they found that the worst kind of boss was one who only cared about getting the job done. They were task-oriented, and they really didn't care what that meant for the people. if they had to work 12 hours a day, if they had to work in uncomfortable conditions, if they got hurt on the job. None of those things mattered as long as we accomplished the task. Well, the problem with that is that people got tired of that. And the first chance they got, they quit those jobs because I don't want to work for a guy who's a jerk. I don't want to work for a guy who's unreasonable, who's someone who just doesn't treat me like a valuable human being. And so that didn't work. On the other extreme, you had people, bosses, leaders who were only interested in being liked, being well liked. This is sometimes called country club management, right? My boss loves me, I'm a player's coach. The problem is everyone loves me, but we're not getting the work done. We are so focused on making everyone happy and comfortable that we're not getting our task accomplished. And so that's an extreme that didn't work. You don't find many people like that. Those are more or less the boundaries of what one can do when trying to balance concern for people and concern for tasks. And so most people kind of balanced the compromise. They were like, oh, they weren't hated by their people, but they weren't loved by their person. They didn't maximize the productivity, but they did enough to keep their job. What they found out is that the best managers were people who had a maximum concern for task. They always accomplished the objective, and they had a maximum concern for people. They did that by respecting the people they work for. And so that became a behavior whereby only the best managers were able to balance their concern for people and concern for tasks. And once those leaders emerged, the word got around fast. Everyone wanted to work for that kind of leader. So they had the most followers and they had the most success. So little by little, teachers in business schools, in leadership schools, were trying to train people to behave that way, to balance concern for people and concern for tasks. And of course, that is harder. It's easier to do one or the other. And so what you found is few people were able to do that. Just like a professional baseball player, a lot of times you have hitters who can hit for power because they're swinging for the fences. They hit a lot of home runs, but they make a lot of outs. Then you have other people who hit for average, right? They make good contact. They spray the ball around the field. They get a high batting average. They get on base a lot, but they don't hit many home runs. They don't drive in many RBIs. But every once in a while, you'll get a superstar who will hit for power and hit for average. And that is, those are the guys who get the multi-million-dollar contracts, right? Well, likewise, those were the managers that became promoted, that became successful, that became well-known. And so that became a standard by which to teach management in business schools, right? A master's of business administration. As they developed courses, they learned the best practices, the best attributes of managers, and that's what they professed, okay? And well, thanks very much for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what you heard, please give us a like. If you'd like to see more of these sessions, please subscribe. And if you would like to see the full video, just click on this link right here.